The morning sun crept slowly over the training grounds, painting the cracked concrete in long golden streaks that stretched like warning signs across the firing range. The air carried the familiar mix of dust, gun oil, and nervous anticipation, the kind of atmosphere that made even seasoned soldiers shift uneasily on their boots. It was qualification day, and everyone knew what that meant. Scores would decide who deployed, who stayed behind, and who would carry the weight of failure long after the day was over. Private Sophia Carter tightened the strap of her Kevlar helmet and adjusted her gloves, steadying her breath against the rising hum of voices around her. 37 soldiers from across 3 companies had assembled here, their futures hanging on the sound of gunfire and the neat holes it left behind on paper targets. To some, this test was routine. To Sophia, it was everything. Back home in Arizona, she had grown up with a rifle slung across her shoulder before she could even lace her boots. Her grandfather had been the one to teach her, an old gunsmith with weathered hands who could read the wind as easily as others read a newspaper. He had shown her how to listen to a weapon, how every scratch and vibration carried a secret. "A rifle doesn't lie, Sophia," he used to say. "It tells you what it is, if you pay attention." That voice still followed her, even here, on the military's proving ground. Sophia's scores in training had been sharp enough to earn her early promotion, a fact that didn't sit well with everyone. Some of her peers respected her discipline, but others saw her rise as undeserved speed. The Army had its politics, and she had stepped right into the middle of them. At the armory counter, Corporal John Miller leaned lazily against the metal frame, a clipboard in one hand, a faint smirk twisting his lips. John had been in uniform far longer than Sophia. 8 years of service, countless rotations. Yet still he remained a corporal, passed over for promotion more than once. The bitterness clung to him like sweat, and seeing younger soldiers surpass him in rank only stoked the resentment burning inside his chest. "Next," John barked without glancing up, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the clipboard. Sophia stepped forward crisply, saluting with practiced precision. "Private Sophia Carter reporting for weapon assignment." John's eyes flicked upward, catching the shine of her brass insignia, her spotless uniform, her posture cut sharp as a blade. Everything about her irritated him. He dragged his fingers slowly down the roster until it stopped, and a thin smile crept across his face. "Carter," he muttered. "Rifle number 23. Lucky you." He disappeared into the armory, past rows of rifles gleaming under fluorescent lights. Most soldiers would be issued clean, battle-ready weapons, maintained carefully by the armory staff. But John didn't walk toward those. He moved instead to the far corner, where one rifle sat apart from the rest. Rifle number 23. Its reputation was known to a handful of men, a weapon plagued with malfunctions, whispered about but never formally retired. What no one else knew was that John had made sure its problems were permanent. Screws loosened just enough to rattle under pressure. The extractor filed down so subtly that only a critical moment would reveal the flaw. Sand and shavings tucked neatly into the chamber, waiting like coiled snakes. It was sabotage dressed up as wear and tear. And it was perfect. He lifted the weapon with casual ease and slid it across the counter to Sophia. "Fresh for maintenance," he said, his voice dripping false sincerity. "Shouldn't give you any trouble." Sophia took the rifle, and the first thing she noticed was its weight. Something felt off, heavier in the wrong places, lighter in others. She cycled the charging handle, checked the trigger, inspected the magazine release. Everything looked normal, but her instincts whispered otherwise. Her grandfather's words returned. "Listen closely. A weapon always speaks to the hands that carry it. Problem, Private?" John's voice cut in, amused. "Having second thoughts about your big day?" "No, Corporal," Sophia replied calmly, though her eyes lingered on the rifle. "Just familiarizing myself." He waved her off with a dismissive gesture, already calling for the next soldier. Around her, others collected their rifles, clean, flawless tools of precision. Private Johnson cradled one tested just last week. Specialist Emma Thompson received a factory new model. Their exchanges were smooth, professional, ordinary. Only Sophia's felt tainted with unease. As she walked away, she passed a knot of soldiers murmuring near Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes. Their chatter broke off when she drew close, but Robert offered a thin smile that carried more weight than his words. "Good luck out there, Carter," he said. Then, after a pause, "Hope everything goes smoothly." The suppressed laughter that followed prickled at the back of her neck. Sophia adjusted her grip on the rifle. The more she carried it, the heavier it felt, as though each step to the range deepened the pull of unseen hands. She checked her gear one last time at the entrance. Ammunition, gloves, eye protection, ear protection, all set. Yet her focus kept circling back to the weapon resting against her shoulder. On the firing line, the whistle blew sharp and final. Soldiers stepped into their lanes, hearts pounding in unison with the metallic clicks of magazines locking into place. Captain Michael Harris, the range officer, raised the microphone and his voice rolled across the open air. "Shooters, you have 20 minutes for zeroing at 50 meters, followed by the qualification course. Minimum score to pass, 23 out of 40. Expert requires 36. Sophia lowered herself into her lane, lane 17. She pressed the rifle tight against her shoulder, sights aligned on the target downrange. Her breath steadied, muscle memory taking over, her grandfather's lessons whispering through every inhale. The first round chambered with a reassuring snap. She squeezed the trigger. A clean shot. The target marked a solid hit. Relief flickered. Maybe her instincts had been wrong. Then she pulled again. Click. Silence. Her stomach tightened. Something was terribly wrong. The click echoed louder than a gunshot in Sophia's mind. No recoil, no smoke, no clean hole on the target. Only the hollow absence of a sound she had been counting on. For a soldier, silence after the trigger was worse than noise. It meant failure. Or worse, it meant betrayal. Sophia froze, forcing herself to wait the required seconds for a possible hang fire. The rule was drilled into every soldier. Patience first, safety always. 10 seconds stretched like chains across her chest, each heartbeat heavier than the last. When the weapon remained lifeless, she tried to eject the cartridge. The bolt resisted, sluggish and stubborn. Finally, the round clattered out onto the concrete at her feet. Embarrassing, but recoverable. A misfire was not unheard of. She slid another round into the chamber. Click. Her heart lurched. 2 in a row. That was no accident. From the corner of her vision, she caught Private Johnson smirking. "Having a rough morning, Carter?" he called out, loud enough for several nearby soldiers to hear. Specialist Emma Thompson chimed in from another lane. "Maybe you should have spent more time practicing, and less time polishing those boots." A few chuckles rippled through the firing line, cruel and sharp. Sophia forced her jaw tight and ignored them. She pulled again, feeding the next round. The bolt slid forward, then slammed shut with a jarring crash, louder than it should have been. A few heads turned, brows raised at the metallic violence. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired this time, but then locked solid. The bolt wouldn't move. No matter how hard she pulled, it remained frozen, a stubborn block of steel defying every drill she had ever learned. Her hands began to sweat, slipping against the charging handle. Panic coiled in her gut. Captain Michael Harris's voice cut across the range like a blade. "Ceasefire. Malfunction on lane 17. All shooters hold." The range went silent. 36 pairs of eyes shifted toward her. Sophia's throat burned as whispers stirred through the crowd. This wasn't just a malfunction, it was a spectacle. Corporal John Miller appeared at her side, his tone dripping with exaggerated concern. "What seems to be the issue, Private?" "The bolt is locked, Corporal. It won't budge," she answered, her voice steadier than she felt. John leaned closer, pretending to inspect the rifle, though Sophia noticed he barely touched it. He said loudly, making sure others could hear. "Looks like operator error. Did you forget to maintain your weapon before today?" Sophia shot him a look. "This rifle came from the armory 30 minutes ago." John's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Careful, Carter. That sounds dangerously close to an accusation." The trap was springing shut. To claim the rifle was defective meant accusing the armory, and by extension him. A dangerous move for a private against a corporal with years in service. She could stay quiet, eat the failure, and live with the shame. Or she could fight. Captain Harris strode forward, expression sharp. Private Carter, regulation allows you 30 seconds to clear the malfunction. If not, you forfeit the qualification. John pulled a stopwatch from his pocket with theatrical precision. 30 seconds, starting now. Sophia's pulse spiked. 30 seconds to salvage her career. 30 seconds while every soldier on the range watched, some eager for her downfall, others waiting to see if she'd collapse. She yanked at the bolt. Nothing. She slammed her palm against the receiver. No movement. Sweat ran into her eyes, blurring her vision. Her hand shook with the effort, but the steel refused to yield. 25 seconds, John called out, his voice smug. Around her, murmurs turned to snickers. She spotted Sergeant Robert Hayes at the edge of the formation, his phone raised, recording every second. Her humiliation would outlive this morning. 15 seconds. You're running out of time. Her grandfather's voice surfaced in her mind, steady and calm. When something feels impossible, Sophia, don't just fight harder. Look closer. Someone made it that way. She froze, staring at the rifle with new eyes. The handguard was slightly loose. The trigger guard seemed misaligned. The firing pin's click had sounded unnatural earlier. Little things, easily overlooked, but together they whispered a single truth. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. 10 seconds, Private, John announced. 9. Sophia stepped back from the weapon. Instead of panicking, she drew herself upright. Her decision crystallized in a breath. 5. 4. She raised her voice. Sir, she called to Captain Harris. This weapon has been sabotaged. The words hit the air like a thunderclap. Every conversation, every whisper on the range died instantly. Captain Harris halted mid-step, his sharp eyes narrowing. That is a serious claim, Private. Are you certain you want to make it? Yes, sir, Sophia said firmly. Her voice carried a conviction she hadn't felt a moment ago. This rifle wasn't malfunctioning. It was tampered with. The silence deepened, pressing in like a held breath. John's face flushed crimson. This is ridiculous, he snapped. She's making excuses for her own incompetence. Captain Harris's tone hardened. Corporal Miller, step back. The crowd stirred, soldiers exchanging shocked glances. This was no longer about a simple malfunction. It was about truth, reputation, and the courage to stand against the weight of hierarchy. Sophia steadied herself, aware of every gaze burning into her. She had two choices, fold under pressure, or expose what had been hidden. Her career, her future, perhaps even her safety balanced on the decision she had just made. And there was no turning back. The word sabotage seemed to hang in the air long after Sophia spoke it, heavier than smoke, heavier than gunpowder. Soldiers shifted uneasily, boots scraping against concrete, breaths caught in throats. It was one thing for a private to stumble on the range. It was another to accuse the chain of command of treachery. Captain Michael Harris stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. His silence carried the weight of judgment, and for a moment Sophia thought she had doomed herself. You understand, Private, Harris said at last, his voice low, but carrying to every corner of the range, that accusing someone of deliberate sabotage is not only serious, it's career-ending if unfounded. Sophia's pulse thundered in her ears, but her voice did not waver. Yes, sir. I stand by my claim. A ripple of murmurs passed through the watching soldiers. Some eyes glinted with curiosity, others with disbelief. Many expected her to crumble, to backpedal, to admit it was nerves. But Sophia did not step back. She planted her boots firmly, rifle in hand, like a soldier defending more than just herself. Corporal John Miller surged forward, red-faced, his fists clenched. Sir, this is absurd. She failed. She can't accept it. So now she's inventing lies. This rifle came straight from the armory. I checked it myself. Step back, Corporal, Harris ordered, his voice like iron. John hesitated, jaw tightening, but he obeyed. His eyes, however, burned holes into Sophia. Harris turned to her again. Show me what you found. Her breath steadied. This was her chance. Her hands, once trembling from panic, shifted into the calm rhythm her grandfather had taught her in Arizona. She asked quietly, "Permission to field strip the weapon, sir?" "Proceed," Harris replied. The soldiers leaned closer, the range now less a firing ground and more a courtroom. Sophia knelt, her movements deliberate, stripping the rifle piece by piece. Each click of a pin, each removed component seemed to peel back a layer of truth. She held up the bolt. "Sir, look here. The extractor claw. It's been filed down. That means the spent casing cannot be gripped properly, which is why the bolt seized." A murmur rolled through the formation. Harris bent to examine the damage, his face darkening as he traced the edge with his thumb. Next, Sophia lifted the firing pin, holding it against the sunlight. "This pin has been bent deliberately. You can see the tool marks. It wasn't where it was forced." Gasps scattered across the line. One soldier muttered, "No way." She wasn't finished. Removing the handguard, she revealed the gas system. "Here, the gas tube has been blocked with steel wool. And here." She used her multi-tool, scraping grit from the chamber, sand and metal shavings. They were packed inside intentionally. When she laid the small glittering pile of debris on her palm for all to see, the silence was suffocating. Harris's expression turned thunderous. His gaze snapped toward John, who stiffened under the scrutiny. Sophia's voice grew steadier with every word. "Sir, look at the screws on the receiver. Fresh tool marks. They were loosened intentionally. And here." She pointed at the trigger spring, stretched longer than it should be. This was pulled beyond its tolerance, reducing tension. But whoever did it overreached. It bound against the wall. That's why the trigger locked. The evidence was undeniable. Each part told the same story. Deliberate interference. Cold sabotage. By now, the crowd of soldiers had grown thicker. Word spread quickly on a base, and men and women from nearby buildings were slipping into the range, curiosity etched on their faces. This was no longer a simple qualification mishap. It was turning into a spectacle, history being written in real time. Captain Harris's voice cut like a whip. Corporal Miller, front and center. John stepped forward, but the swagger that usually accompanied his movements was gone. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The weight of every watching eye pressed down on him. "Corporal," Harris said, his words sharp, "you signed off on this rifle. You handed it to Private Carter. Where is the maintenance log for this weapon?" John swallowed. "Sir, it must have been misplaced. We maintain many rifles." "That's not an answer." Harris thundered, his composure breaking for the first time. The eruption silenced the whispers instantly. From the crowd, Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, the armory chief, pushed forward, his face flushed with anger. He took one look at the disassembled weapon and swore under his breath. "Miller, what in God's name have you done?" John shook his head frantically. "Master Sergeant, I don't know. There must be some mistake." Sophia rose to her feet, the rifle's sabotaged parts laid out before her like evidence in a trial. Her voice rang clear. "The mistake was assuming I would panic, sir. The mistake was thinking I wouldn't figure it out." The murmurs grew into a buzz of astonishment. Soldiers who had laughed earlier now stared at her with something closer to awe. Captain Harris reached for his radio. "Range control to base command. I need the provost marshal and the company commander at the firing line immediately. This is now a criminal matter." The gravity of his words hit like another gunshot. Sophia stood taller, the ruined pieces of rifle number 23 glinting in the sun. She had exposed the truth, but she also knew this was only the beginning. A battle won did not mean the war was over. Still, as she looked at John Miller's ashen face, she understood something vital. The trap set for her had failed, and in its collapse, it had uncovered not her weakness, but her strength. The crowd was restless, buzzing with whispers that carried across the range like static before a storm. Soldiers leaned in, officers crossed their arms, and even the hardened veterans couldn't hide their curiosity. It was no longer about a qualification score. It had become a trial, and Private Sophia Carter stood at the center. Captain Michael Harris's voice cut through the tension. "Private Carter, after what this rifle has endured, it may not be safe to fire again." Sophia glanced at the weapon sprawled in pieces before her, its secrets laid bare under the morning sun. "Sir," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the gathered formation, "I've seen every flaw, every deliberate cut and bend. Give me the tools, and I'll make it fire better than before." The audacity of her statement rippled through the onlookers. Repairing a sabotaged rifle in front of the entire base. Impossible, or legendary. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes arrived moments later, his face still stormy, from confronting Corporal John Miller. He carried a heavy maintenance kit, setting it down with a thud beside her. "Private," he growled, "you've got every tool we own. Prove yourself." Sophia nodded, kneeling on the concrete as though it were an altar. She laid out the tools with surgical precision: screwdrivers, punches, solvents, files, and a scattering of replacement parts. Around her, the soldiers pressed closer, eager to see whether she would crumble or rise. Her hands moved steadily, each gesture deliberate. She began with a firing pin, bent by malice and marked by pliers. Using a brass punch, she tapped gently, coaxing the steel back into its true shape. Each strike echoed across the range, sharp, rhythmic, hypnotic. "Whoever bent this," Sophia explained, her voice calm and clear, "knew exactly where to apply pressure. They wanted the rifle to fail at the worst possible moment, but steel remembers its purpose if you remind it." Behind her, John's heavy breathing was audible, even as the provost marshal questioned him quietly. Sophia blocked out the sound. The only thing that mattered was the weapon before her. Next came the extractor claw, filed down to sabotage extraction. She studied its edges under a magnifying glass, calculating the angle of restoration. Slowly, carefully, she reshaped the claw with a file, shaving metal until it regained its grip. Tiny sparks flickered in the sunlight. "My grandfather taught me this," she said softly, not looking up. "Every tool has one job. Understand that job, and you can always restore it." A hush fell over the crowd. Soldiers who had mocked her now leaned forward with fascination, drawn in by the quiet confidence of her hands. She turned to the gas tube, clogged with steel wool. With a cleaning rod, she drove the obstruction out, then flushed the channel with solvent until it gleamed. The chamber followed, scrubbed with swabs and picks until every last grain of sand and shaving was gone. Master Sergeant Hayes, watching closely, muttered, "That's the cleanest chamber this rifle's ever had." Sophia smiled faintly, never lifting her eyes. "That's the idea, Master Sergeant." The trickiest part was the spring, overstretched and warped. Using a delicate tool, she compressed it little by little, testing the trigger pull after each adjustment. At last, the tension settled into balance, smooth, reliable, ready. The saboteur wanted uncertainty, Sophia explained as she worked. "An unpredictable trigger destroys confidence, but confidence is built one careful step at a time." Time passed in silence, the only sounds the scrape of tools and the soft clink of parts being restored. What had begun as humiliation had become a performance, a lesson in patience, resilience, and the art of refusing defeat. Finally, she began to reassemble the weapon. Every component she had touched carried her fingerprints, her effort, her will. The bolt slid in smoothly, locking with precision. The trigger broke crisp and clean. The safety engaged with a satisfying click. Sophia stood, holding the rifle as if it were something reborn. Function test complete. This weapon is ready to fire. The crowd stirred, a wave of anticipation rolling through them. Harris stepped closer, his expression torn between caution and admiration. "Private Carter," he said slowly, "are you absolutely certain this rifle is safe?" She met his eyes without flinching. "Sir, I stake my career on it." Murmurs spread again, but they carried a different tone now, less doubt, more awe. Soldiers who had dismissed her now watched with respect, perhaps even belief. Harris retrieved a fresh magazine of ammunition and handed it over. The gesture was more than procedural. It was trust placed in her hands. Sophia slid the magazine home, the click echoing across the tense silence. She chambered the first round, pressed the rifle to her shoulder, and aimed downrange. Her breathing slowed. Inhale. Exhale halfway. Hold. Squeeze. The crack split the air. Smoke curled faintly from the barrel. Through her scope, she saw a clean hole in the bullseye. A ripple of gasps moved through the formation. She chambered another round. Another crack. Another perfect hit. Confidence surged through her veins. The weapon, once designed to betray her, now obeyed her will with flawless precision. Behind her, Master Sergeant Hayes exhaled in disbelief. She's turned a sabotaged wreck into a marksman's dream. Captain Harris's voice rang out, steadier now. Private Carter, continue your qualification. Every eye fixed on her lane. This was no longer just a test of marksmanship. It was the proving ground of character, of trust, of defiance against sabotage. Sophia adjusted her stance, sights locked on the target. Around her, the air thrummed with anticipation, as though the entire base held its breath for the next shot. The rifle cracked, and the crowd froze. One perfect shot was luck. Two might be coincidence. But everyone knew. If Sophia Carter kept hitting the center, this morning would become more than a qualification. It would become legend. She chambered the next round, every motion fluid, deliberate. The bolt slid like silk, the trigger broke clean as glass. Another hole, another bullseye. The electronic scoreboard flashed 10. Whispers turned into silence, then silence into awe. Even the skeptics stopped breathing. Captain Michael Harris raised his voice above the hush. Shooter at lane 17, proceed. Sophia blocked out the noise, the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, the knowledge that half the base had gathered to watch. In her world now, there was only the target, the wind, and the rifle she had rebuilt with her own hands. Round after round, she fired. Shot 3 perfect. Shot 4 perfect. By the 5th, the murmur stopped entirely. The only sounds left were the sharp crack of her rifle and the steady beeps of the scoring system announcing another flawless hit. Master Sergeant Robert Hayes muttered under his breath, binoculars pressed to his eyes. "This can't be real." "It's real," Harris said flatly, spotting scope locked on her target. "I'm watching every shot." By shot 10, soldiers began exchanging looks of disbelief. Some leaned forward as though pulled by an invisible thread. Others shook their heads, grinning in shock. Sophia Carter, the private meant to fail, was rewriting the story of the range. The targets shifted farther, 100 meters, then 2. Smaller circles, harder shots. For most soldiers, the pressure would have cracked focus. For Sophia, it sharpened her senses. She studied the wind flags, adjusted her aim, and fired. Bullseye. Again and again. "Private Carter," Harris called during a pause. "Do you realize you're on track for a perfect score?" Sophia lifted her head from the scope, blinking as though waking from a trance. The crowd stretched before her, now 100 strong. Even officers she barely recognized had arrived, their expressions unreadable. "Yes, sir," she said calmly. "I'm aware." The murmur that followed was electric. Everyone now knew what was at stake. The base record, 298 out of 300, held for 3 years by Staff Sergeant Emma Thompson. Emma herself stood near the line, arms folded, eyes fixed on Sophia. When Sophia fired her next shot dead center, Emma finally spoke, her voice carrying enough for those nearby to hear. "Keep going, Private. Show them all." The encouragement from a record holder lit a spark in the crowd. For the first time that morning, applause broke out after a shot. Not mocking, not skeptical, genuine. 200 meters. 300. The black dots of the targets barely visible to the naked eye. Yet Sophia's rounds landed true, one after the other. The scoreboard flashed a row of 10s, so uniform it seemed broken. By the time she tied the record, the range was no longer a training ground. It was a stage, and she was its star. Soldiers cheered between shots. Reporters from the base paper snapped photos. Even the provost marshal, who had come to arrest John Miller, now stood among the crowd watching history unfold. And Miller himself? His face was pale as chalk, his wrists locked in cuffs. Yet even he couldn't look away. His sabotage hadn't destroyed her. It had forged her into something greater. Sophia breathed steadily. Each pull of the trigger was a conversation with her grandfather's voice in her memory. Trust the weapon. Trust yourself. Shot 28, perfect. Shot 29, perfect. At shot 30, The scoreboard flashed a number never seen before. 300. The crowd erupted. Soldiers roared. Caps flew into the air. Officers clapped like thunder. The noise was so fierce it rolled across the base like artillery. Sophia set the rifle down gently, her chest rising with calm pride. Colonel Michael Hayes, the base commander, stepped forward. He had seen decades of soldiers, decades of scores, decades of fleeting legends. But his eyes betrayed awe as he extended his hand. "Private Carter," he said, his voice resonant. "In all my years of service, I've never witnessed what you accomplished today. You didn't just pass. You didn't just set a new record. You reached perfection under sabotage, scrutiny, and impossible odds." Sophia shook his hand firmly, the weight of his words settling over her. "Sir," she said, glancing at the rifle she had repaired and fired, "if it's all the same to you, I'd like to keep this weapon. We've been through a lot together." The colonel's stern face broke into a rare smile. "After today, Private, you can have anything you want." The formation erupted again, soldiers chanting her name. Some shouted with laughter, others with pride. The firing range had transformed into a theater of victory. In the distance, the MPs loaded John Miller into a vehicle. His sabotage had not only failed, it had carved out a legend. For a moment, his eyes met Sophia's. They burned with anger, but beneath it flickered something else. Perhaps respect, perhaps regret. Sophia's phone buzzed as she stood among the chaos. A single message from her grandfather back in Arizona saw the news. "Proud of you, Sophia. Remember, the rifle doesn't miss. Only the shooter does." She smiled, thumbs tapping back. "Neither do I, Grandpa. Neither do I." The story of Private Sophia Carter and Rifle Number 23 spread across the base like wildfire. But for her, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A reminder that even in the face of sabotage, betrayal, and doubt, resilience could turn failure into triumph, and a single shot could echo forever.